Round one of the 2024 Six Nations did not exactly go to script, as both England and Scotland cut their wins pretty close and Ireland upset France in Marseille. Joining myself and the columnists today to look back on those matches, as well as look ahead to round two and pay tribute to Welsh rugby great Barry John, is Welsh rugby and commentary legend Jonathan Davies. The first week of the Six Nations arguably did not go to script. It certainly didn't go to the script that the Rugby Paper Podcast wrote, if our predictions were anything to go by. Ireland took a huge step to becoming the first ever back-to-back Grand Slam champions. An England performance that has divided opinion, and of course the game of the weekend in Cardiff, which somehow left no real winner, which you wouldn't have thought with Scotland 27-0 up with 37 minutes to go. Joining us to discuss all that is returning guest and Welsh rugby and commentary legend Jonathan Davies. How are you, Jiffy?
I'm good, thank you very much. It's horrendous weather here at the moment, but yeah, nice. Enjoy the first weekend.
Well, it's good to see you. And you said week to week you're filming, and then weekends you're Six Nations at the moment.
Yeah, well, as for all of us, it gets a bit busy this time of year, doesn't it? So yeah, we're filming the Jonathan show at the moment, and look who sat there. Say hello.
A guest, and he's on in a couple of weeks.
He's on in a couple of years. He won't get much. He's my twin brother, really.
Oh, well, Nigel's on. I think it's week 9 of the Six Nations, so just after the end of the tournament. So we'll look forward to seeing him then. You're right. It is very, very busy, and obviously I'll ask you about Cardiff in a second. The sort of priority, first of all, today is there's been some very sad news coming out of the rugby world. The day after that famous Scotland win in Cardiff, it was announced that fly half Barry John had very sadly passed away at the age of 79 at the University Hospital of Wales. Jiffy, there aren't many people who are better placed to speak about Barry. You watched him growing up. You went to the same school as him as well, so I'll just hand over to you.
Yeah, it was odd, when you walk into the gates of Gwenroth Grammar School, there's and you see there's Carwyn James, Barry John, and Gareth Davies. My predecessors, all on the wall. So there's no pressure on a young kid, going into that school. The fortunate thing about growing up in Wales, Barry, although he moved to Cardiff, he only lived. I went to live in the same village as him, Kevin, I did. So he was only 10 miles away from Tramsaran. Phil Bennett is only 5 miles away from Tramsaran. So you grow up watching these, whether it's on television or live. And it's just they're an inspiration, because if they can do it from their backgrounds, why can't we do it? So, and then when you meet them, they're just great blokes. They're genuinely real nice people, rugby people with time for everyone. And yeah, it's been difficult, the last few years with Eddie Butler going and Benny going, Jerry, JPR going, Di Watkins going, it's and now Barry. So it's those are the big names that have gone. Ben Price. So it's a generation of superstars, that have passed away. So it's been very, very sad, and I've done too many of these interviews now, to be honest.
I think I suppose that's testament, all these names that you're mentioning, that many of them we discussed in the podcast following their passing.
Yeah.
Testament to the golden generation of Wales that it was as well, because you mentioned as soon as Barry John retired, and he only retired at 27, Phil Bennett was there. So it really was a golden generation of Welsh rugby.
Yeah. Very lucky.
No, very, very lucky. Chris, when I was sort of obviously when I saw the news, I obviously, did some extra reading around Barry John as well, and something that a lot of people are surprised by. Obviously, his reputation precedes him. A 6-year career is not long. He was in the George Best ilk in terms of the fame not necessarily sitting right with him, which for many led to an early retirement at 27. But the fact that he left such a legacy in a 6-year career, is it the most efficient legacy a player's ever left?
Well, of course, there was a lot less Test rugby in those days. And crikey, when he retired, I would only have been sort of 12 or 13 myself. But I was brought up in a rugby area, didn't throw up quite as many superstars as Jonathan's area. It threw up Chilcott. which is a different kettle of fish, really. But Jerry Gus got on those people. But growing up and getting into rugby, really, and sort of moving out of that sort of early childhood football obsession and finding other sports that maybe had a bigger effect on me. I mean, Barry was a giant of a name. And what quickly became clear, even to the uneducated eye, which many would argue I still have, but there was, I mean, he was clearly a master of what he did. There was great mastery, but there was a mystery about him. That was the thing. He did what appeared to be quite simple things, and you couldn't quite work out how he'd done them. And I think back to Jonathan's commentary on the game at the weekend. And very often, Jonathan, I mean, in fact, you often talk about the simple things. Do the simple things. This is obvious. Do this, do this, do this. And Barry John understood the simple thing. And to understand the simple thing as well as Barry did, and maybe as well as Jonathan did, and Benny and the other really great Welsh fly halves, that's quite a difficult thing. It's difficult to be that easy. But once you've mastered it, you've mastered the game. And Barry mastered the game. I mean, there are a hell of a lot of clips on YouTube of him creating stuff for other people. Not so many of him scoring himself, although he scored some beauties. But crikey, he didn't have to create for other people. And of course, he had the wonderful kicking game as well. Whoever it was said he had the knack of appearing in a room without using the door. Had it about right. There was something slightly mystical, not in a religious sense, but something that was something indefinable about what he was able to do, and that's to be treasured, because that doesn't come along very often.
I think it's very, Ollie. It's when you say it, he's a type of guy where he ghosted on the field, and he had graceful and style. And when you had Di Watkins or Phil Bennett, they were jinky times a guy, explosive player. Gareth was slightly different. He just ghosted and swerved and ball in two hands, and he just made. It's like any other sportsman. If you've got time on the ball in whatever sport you play, then you're a special player. And then Barry certainly was that. I was very lucky. I met him for a couple of beers with his two brothers, two very good rugby players as well, and just to sit there and listen to them talk was an education in itself.
He sort of made time as well as space, and he sort of played in slow motion, and you couldn't work it out because he had really quick guys who couldn't catch him. He had really hard cases who couldn't lay a hand on him, and yet he didn't seem to be sweating. He didn't seem to be exerting himself. As Jiffy said, he ghosted and glided. I had a quick look at that 72 match today just to remind myself. He was doing the kick pass 40 years, 50 years before it was sort of became a thing. He didn't just do a crossfield kick. He just didn't put it up in the air. He did that on occasions as well. He actually did the kick pass. And one other thing I just thought about him, it was just 6 years, as you say, the career. But actually, he only played in a winning side once in the first 8 matches of his Wales and 68 Lions career. It all came with an incredible rush at the end. With the 71, well, Wales started getting seriously good in 70 after taking a hammering in New Zealand the previous year. 71 Grand Slam, 71 Lions tour, 72 gone. He'd gone. Age 27. The rock star of rugby gone. Like all rock stars, they go at 27. So he had an extraordinary career, and part of the mystique, as Chris was saying, is why we still talk about him like this. Now, he had that X factor, which even some of the incredible names like JPR and Gareth, they didn't quite have Barry's X factor for some reason.
My feeling is that he had incredible balance. And I read something where he talked about ensuring that he was as good off one foot as he was off the other. And in terms of his movement and how he weighted himself when he was running, he was. I mean, the comparison with George Best is a very good one in the sense that they both seemed, whether it was mud or whatever, they just seemed to glide over the surface. I I was 15 when the 1971 Lions tour was on, and one of the things I remember about it was just how bloody frustrating it was looking at the black and white coverage, and how there was virtually nothing, none of the analysis around it or anything like that. You got the match, and that was pretty well what you got. The analysis was all in the papers. But I played some club rugby in New Zealand, did a short stint there at the end of the 70s. And I know from that there was a generation of young New Zealand backs who were absolutely inspired by what he, in particular, among that 1971 Lions side and others did. And New Zealand, you'll remember, for a long time were just about smashing everybody up front for years and years and years. And that saw a shift, really, in their game towards far more expansive backline play. So he probably, in a way, didn't do Wales or the Lions any favours there in terms of inspiring the New Zealanders. But it just showed just what a phenomenal influence and a phenomenal talent he was.
Yeah.
I think we mentioned JPR Williams. I think I'm quoting JPR when I'm saying he was the best player JPR ever played with. So I guess to give an idea of how good he really was, that's a pretty good idea in itself.
Does that mean that JPR didn't play in New Zealand alongside Nick Cain?
Must do.
Yeah, very good, Chewy.
Right. Well, I know we, and especially you, Jiffy, will miss him, as will all of British rugby. Or I'm sure at Twickenham this weekend, and I know you'll be there, Jiffy. There will be a moment to acknowledge and mourn the loss of one of the greatest fly halves to ever play the game. So I think we'll make the most of that moment when it does come. We'll look ahead to that Twickenham game in a little bit. Let's journey back first, and we'll go through round one in reverse order for obvious reasons. Jiffy, Cardiff, like I say, and I think I'm quoting Tom English on the BBC. The loser felt better than the winner. I suppose as a loser, do you agree with that?
I think that's where we are at the moment. I think we have a realization, and that's where Scotland are at the moment. Scotland will be desperately disappointed that they gave up that commanding lead and really lost control of the second half. And aside, that quality, will have been disappointed. And they do say, it's it'll be good for us because of a realization of where we are. I don't think that's the case. It'll be slightly worrying as well because if they're going to allow a young Welsh side to control the game and run the game, that'll be slightly worrying for them if they want to, look at championships and all that. So, but for Wales, this is the worst first half I've seen for a long, long time. Tactically naive. They were all very nervous. I watched them when they sang the anthems. They all looked very nervous because they're a very young bunch. But tactically, they were very naive. I went to meet the coaching staff before the game to say what their plans were, and they were going to loosen it up a little bit, maybe shorten the line out and get running in midfield. Now, what I couldn't understand, once they did that, they didn't go through the phases. They just kicked the ball away, and also because they haven't got the great kicking out, they haven't got any kicking centre, so the young fullback has got to come in to take a little bit of pressure off the standoff to bring the wingers up because it didn't engage the backfield whatsoever, and it was an easy afternoon for Scotland. But once they had realised they had to throw the ball about and get a little bit wider because they didn't have any gain line success, then things opened up and yellow penalties against Scotland and yellow cards helped them and they got back in the game. And being realistic, we all know what momentum is like in sport. They should have won. They should have won that game. They got into a position where 27 points down to get into position to win the game with the momentum they had. They would have been. I think they've been disappointed that they didn't win it. But they lost one crucial line out, and there was a forward pass, and they kicked once in the last 10 minutes, and I don't think they needed to do that. And that was the difference then.
Do you not think, Jonathan, before the game, I was more than happy to cut Wales an awful lot of slack because, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've never seen a Welsh side that callow, that inexperienced. I mean, on paper, it looked extraordinarily fragile. I mean, amazingly fragile. And actually, the change at half time, a little bit enforced and what have you in the outside half position. But I do think that they made a mark, those guys off the bench. I mean, I think Thomas Williams is a good player anyway. But I'm just wondering, going back to Barry for a minute and the Welsh tradition of fly halves, I know that Johan Lloyd, when he was here in Bristol, I'm speaking from Bristol now, I mean, he looked on the ball, he looked as cocky as you used to do. I mean, absolutely amazingly confident in his skills and in his ability to implement those skills. And I'm just wondering if he has the potential, and of course we've spoken loads of people with potential, but if he has the potential to be the next real good one in line.
Well, that's the thing. It's there's no substitute for pace, right? And that's one thing he's got. And defenders stand off him because they're worried about him. So it was a forced change because Sam got off injured, Sam Costello. But it'll be interesting to see tactically and selection wise who Warren goes with this week. I think maybe Johan Lloyd could be an outside centre. I think people always talk about how difficult it is to be a defensive 13. If you've got a bit of a rugby brain, you just got to go up and hinge in and out and communicate well. I played centre in rugby league, and you just got to communicate really, really well. And if you get good at it, you don't have to do many tackles, to be honest, because the channel is 10 and 12. So it's that could be an option, but I don't think the Scarlets will put him there. So he could, if he starts on Saturday, he starts at 10, I think. And I do think that they need help outside in the kicking game, as I mentioned earlier, the first half performance. But also they need gain line. That's the problem they had. They couldn't. They were telegraphed, one ball carries going up getting smashed by the Scottish boys, so they could not get any gain line. And we all know what it's like. If you get a little bit of gain line post contact, the defence has got to go back a little bit. Then there's options for you. If you don't get that, it's a long, long afternoon, and that's why they were forced to kick early. So, I think George North will come back in.
I was going to say that changes if North comes back in a little bit, doesn't it?
Yes, because that's one thing that came out of the Wales World Cup. Tompkins and George North played exceptionally well, and they run some good lines. But it's still that thing. If Wales can get parity in the lineup, was a shambles as well. So that'll be an interesting selection. Do you start with Elliot D? Because if they start like that against England won't allow them back into the game. And it'll be interesting to see what England do, because the blitz defence, that didn't work. Italy cut them in the wide channels. So it'll be an interesting encounter, because I can't. Both would just say, look, we'll just out muscle these and then we'll play the football later on. Forget what we've said previously in New England. That'll be rubbish. So they'll just go back to it, and then but the points will come in the second half. If I was Borthwick, that's what I would do. Say, right, okay, we grind them down, we just get in front, keep the scoreboard ticking over, and then we'll see how it goes in the second half. That should be the plan. And Wales have got to go right from the start and go, right, we've got to loosen it up. We've got to get a good kicking game. We've got to get a little bit wider with the tip box with some of the prop forwards, and then we'll see what happens.
Just to underline something you said, Jiffy and Chris, about the callousness of Wales, I read this morning that Joe McCarthy, who is Ireland's youngest player in the squad, would only be the 12th youngest player in the Wales squad. So it is completely new territory, really. And why not? First Six Nations after the World Cup. If you're going to do it now, and let everybody know that that's what you're doing. So I think that's pretty good. Yeah.
But I think Brendan, is the fact that it's all kind of forced, really. It is. If you look at it, this is where we are at in Wales. We haven't got the numbers of players that England and France have got. A lot of retirees. A lot of boys then have moved away to go and play, and they're ineligible to play for Wales. So this is where we're at, and also the regions with the lack of funding, they can't buy players. So these young players have been pushed in. So this is where we're at, and the fans have got to be a little bit patient. First half was rubbish, and I was so delighted for the players, the management and coaches, and also the fans, that the character that this young side showed. So if they can bring that confidence and a bit of game nous to Twickenham, and hopefully it's going to be an interesting afternoon.
I was also delighted because myself and Nick had tipped them to win. We thought it might be an upset win. And at 27-0 after 42 minutes, it was looking like the worst prediction in the history of predictions. I mean, it was shocking. So,
and they scored straight away. There was a poor kick chase. This 27-0 up. And if Scotland would have just kept on going, we were looking at, all of us in the commentary point going like, this could be 40-50 if we're not careful. But, I'm so glad for all the players that, and as Ollie said, we were the happiest at the end. Although Wales lost, I still think we were maybe happier than the Scottish.
There was one moment in that game that I wanted to ask you about, Jiffy, and actually we did we put an Ask Jiffy post out on our socials for listeners to ask you questions, and Emily Andrews has messaged us on Instagram to raise a similar issue. Wales's try from the driving maul in the second half. The referee played the advantage, and instead of giving a penalty try, let the play go on, try from a maul, cards the player. As a try is obviously scored, there's no penalty try. The 5 points is guaranteed, but you still have the conversion. The conversion's then missed. 3 scores later, Wales lose by a point. If a penalty try is given, the score's 28-27, Wales win by a point. So
that's it. I can understand that, but that's a kick they should kick. So the referee is thinking he can't, in hindsight, say, "Oh, he missed a conversion. I'll award a penalty try." That's the thing he can't do. He's either going to make a brave call and go right under the post, 7 points, bang, let's get away from it, or he said, "Look, he scored a try," which a lot of referees usually, do. Alex Mann would have been, really upset if he'd have not, given him a try on his debut. But yeah, small things like that happen. I think that the momentum that Wales had, that line out again, give them field position. And because they didn't need to chase the game then, they just need to get into field position, look for a penalty. And they would have gone into field position because Scotland, they were so scared of getting into contact and committing in the rucks and mauls, that it was easy for Wales to get the ball and go forward. So I just think that it was, we should have won it at the end in the position we got.
It's interesting. You create your own pressure, you create your own luck in the game, and Wales definitely did that. But the run of penalties that the Scots gave away was unbelievable. I think you were talking about 16 in a row, something like that?
I think there's definitely 14 in a row. So I don't think I've ever heard that stat before.
No,
never heard it.
I don't think I have. And the other thing is that I absolutely take what you say about Wales should have won it because they had the momentum.
Yeah.
Van der Merwe, he was lucky. Brendan pointed out, and he was right. He was extremely lucky to get the try in the first half because Russell's pass to him was forward, without a shadow of a doubt, forward. And the Van der Merwe, the one that he didn't score right at the end when he managed to ground it on Dwyer's leg. Real game of ups and downs, but the momentum was definitely with Wales. But I suppose it showed that they're a young side, and they just lost their way in the last sort of 3 minutes or so, didn't they?
Yeah, I think you got to applaud Scotland as well, because I've been having a bit of stick with the Scottish fans, but they're always moaning about me anyway, so it doesn't bother me. It's all they played well in the first half. They say you can only play what's in front of you, and they played it very well. The forwards carried well, and Finn Russell had the easiest 40 minutes he'll ever have in his life. When he was just picking holes in the Welsh defence, and defensively we struggled. We got forwards in the wrong areas. So, but Scotland, played well in the first half, and they're a side, that are capable of beating anyone on the day. They've just got to put a full 80 minutes together.
Well, on the Scotland front, Brendan, I was giving you a bit of stick for predicting, was it Italy to beat Scotland? But Scotland to beat France in this tournament, but actually you're probably feeling quite good about that prediction.
Well, it's a funny old thing now, isn't it? Because on Saturday, we got two teams with something to prove, haven't we? Scotland with something to prove, really. France with something to prove, definitely. All I would say with Scotland is I think they would have been really down in the dumps a bit after the match, and maybe even on Sunday morning. But I think by the time they got back to Edinburgh and clocked on Monday, everything had settled a bit. They think, well, okay, we've got an away win in Cardiff. We've got a stack of stuff to work on here. So Gregor will be rubbing his hands. There's a revved up France at home. The weather might be a bit dirty. I think they could be in quite good shape come kick-off time, Scotland. And, France, I don't think will be particularly relishing this fixture, although they will be revved up good and proper now. There's no question about that. So the dynamics of that match are always quite interesting to me anyway, and doubly so now. Whether I'll be remotely correct with my prediction, I don't know, but I'd say watch this space. It could be a very, very interesting game.
Just before we move on to, actually, we'll go to France, Ireland next. I was going to do Italy, England first, but we'll go to France, Ireland now that you mentioned. There was one more question for you from Jonathan Fallon on Instagram, Jiffy. Do you now think that Wales should have gone for the points in the first half instead of going for the corner when they were, quote unquote, too far behind?
Again, in hindsight, did anyone, when they had that penalty, think they would be 1 point behind? You can't think like that. You got to think in the moment, and 20 points, you're not going to win that game if you don't score tries. So they had to score tries. So you make a referee's call, and I think they were the right call, really. It's just to try and get something before halftime. It didn't work, but still for me, just they did the right thing.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. Let's move on to that France-Ireland game now. We were obviously talking it up as the most exciting game of the weekend this time last week. It was certainly the least close of the weekend, not necessarily the least exciting, but we were all a little bit surprised by that, certainly. Chewy, sum it up, really.
Are we talking about the last French performance or the one to come? I was startled at how poor they were.
Yeah.
Actually, let's take nothing away from Ireland, first of all. That was an exceptional performance in all departments. And everyone's talking about Joe McCarthy and and Jack Crowley. I can see that. Ty Byrne was off the scale on Friday. Absolutely off the scale. In line-out burglaries, it breakdown on the carry, in his cutting of lines. He's as good a second row as there is in the world at the moment. That bloke, and he was exceptional. I also think France picked the wrong side. How you can leave with a line out that Ireland have, and it is a threatening line out. How you leave someone like Cameron Walkie on the bench is just beyond me, really. And of course, their line out went completely pop. And now, of course, Brendan's quite right. France will be revved up in their own kind of way for Saturday because they're coming off the back of a humiliation in a place where they're really not meant to be humiliated. It's not Paris where they have the old rough game. Marseille is a real stronghold for them, a massive stronghold. And to be taken to the cleaners there really would have come as a shock. But I see everywhere, Fabien Galtier is a divisive figure in France. He was a divisive figure as a player. And he had a reputation of being able to start a fight in an empty room, Fabien. He could have an argument with anyone at any time of day. And now people like Philippe Saint-André, Richard Dourt, Bougelal, who employed Galtier in Toulon, they're all on his back now. And they're saying that he's a terrible man manager, especially when things are going wrong. And it's very easy for him to fall out with the French dressing room in its entirety in the space of a sentence. So you've got all that pressure coming in now, and Galtier it'll be very interesting to see his body language at the weekend. It'll be very interesting to see how Gregory Aldrit, who's an inexperienced captain at test level, how much he can give the side. And of course, it's also very interesting to see who they pick, because that was a tatty old performance that they put in on Friday.
Jiffy, what do you think went so wrong, really?
I think it's the one thing I'm looking at the French. You know what they're like. Whether they're afraid or interested in something. And I'm not sure how big the World Cup defeat knocked them, because everything was geared up. You know, you look at the under-20s for the last decade were geared up to play in this World Cup. Everything was geared up to this World Cup. And I don't actually know how much of an effect it's really, really had on them. You know, DuPont's gone, yeah, okay, I'm going to win the gold medal now, you know, in the Olympics in Paris. So that was their real goal. And if they can see where they are as a collectively now, that's the thing. And I think Saturday will be a big test, because if they'd have maybe nonchalantly won on the last weekend and then turned up to Scotland and not knock Scotland over, but no, there's question marks about them. There's question marks, as Chris said, about the management. You know, defensively they were poor. So that for me, it's all, if they go to Scotland with the right attitude, you know, they're so big and powerful. You know, it'll be a real tough ask for Scotland to beat them, right? So that'll be the question mark for me. Is not their ability, is their attitude and application about this season after the World Cup. So that's key for me. The other thing, Ireland. I think Ireland is still the best side in the world. I think they had maybe one defensive mistake against New Zealand and they lost, but they've just kicked on. And the off, Chris mentioned again, the off the ball running of those players is phenomenal. I can see the rugby league influence in it about the angles of running. It's not only the ball carriers, but it's, you know, the dummy runners which hold people, which creates the space. They use the left-footed winger low very, very well. And then, but if you watch the schools in the 20s, most of the provinces play the same now. So when Jack Crowley comes in, you know, I thought you had an exceptional game, you know, and it would be a brilliant pack forward. So I think they're a very, very good side, Ireland. They do everything well. And we always thought that New Zealand were the best side in the world because of their rugby intelligence. I think the rugby intelligence in that Irish side now, you know, is very, very high. They all know what they do, and they all know what they do for each other to get into space. So I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the game. And, you know, 14 men, they still had the opportunity to get back in the game, and then they didn't, and then Ireland put them away. It was a brilliant test match, and I think Ireland are so far ahead of, you know, the others now that it'll be difficult to see anyone beat them.
All that connects actually with the criticism that St Andre has made, and I suppose it's typical of any ex-coach to come out and start criticising after a defeat like that. But St Andre drew the distinction. The big distinction he drew between Ireland and France on Friday night was the tempo at which the Irish played, as against the complete lack of tempo that France were able to generate. And the danger for France, I guess, going to Murrayfield is that Scotland, if they have the wind in their tail a little bit, they do play a quick game. Yeah. And it could well be, if he picks another massive pack of forwards, which maybe he may well do. But, you know, if he starts with Tuolangi in the second row rather than Wookie, if he goes for the power game, the real power game against Scotland, he may find himself caught on the same horns of a dilemma, really, because the other lot are playing it a game that's twice as quick as the one you're capable of playing.
I think that, you know, if you look at what the French clubs have done in Europe, the best French clubs have done in Europe, they're capable of playing at real pace. You know, Toulouse took Harlequins apart, Bordeaux took Saracens apart. You know, there was something very odd about the French, I thought, in Marseille. They, you know, I mean, we talk about England being slow starters and so on, but the French, you know, the French were so unlike what we've seen of them over the last 4 years, where they've been energized by Sean Edwards in particular, their offensive defense. Guys like Villiers, who is a winger, who's one of the best turnover merchants in the game, so on and so forth. They hardly won a turnover. I mean, Ireland played exceptionally well, but the French didn't really challenge at the breakdown. They left Luku blowing in the wind half the bloody time.
Absolutely.
You know, they were really, really poor, I thought. And the idea, you know, that you can't be competitive with 14 men, you know, we've seen from the Springboks, we've seen from New Zealand in the World Cup final, you can be competitive with 14 men. There's no question if you've got your defensive mindset right and you're just your game heads on. And I just felt that they were very unlike anything that we've seen for 4 years. I don't know what goes on in the background. It's very difficult to know, but they've certainly been highly motivated for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
And it seemed like they went into this tournament flat.
Well, they had a good 3 or 4 minutes at the start, didn't they, France? And then as soon as Ireland put together one of those multi-phase attacks, you're sort of 16, 17 phases, and was smashing them in all directions and, popping that ball out like a poached egg. And it was all, the air seemed to go out of the French.
Yeah.
Completely.
I think they played too quickly for them. The ruck speed was under 2 seconds, and the two things, one, Penno wasn't really involved apart from the try, and for the main one for me, they go forward man was Dante, and he wasn't when I can't remember him. I can't remember him carrying the ball. But I know now next Saturday, he'll be running straight, at Finn Russell. That'll be their plan, won't they? That'll be their go forward, run at Finn Russell. But it's going to be a really interesting encounter in Murrayfield, which Scotland have got a great chance of winning.
Yeah. Especially with Tuipulotu playing pretty well. Crikey,
he is. I would say everyone talks about Finn Russell. I think he is the one that makes them tick. He is the foil for Russell. He's got a great kicking game, short kicking game. He's a brilliant distributor, and also he can carry. So he just puts it at the back, takes it on if he has to, angles his run, squares his shoulders up, which makes it easier then for those boys to perform all around him. I think he is the key player for Scotland.
I think with France, you do have to address the elephant in the room, and that is they're only half a team at the moment without Dupont. And I mean, I dare say that would be the same for any side. And I thought Luku is a good player. He is a good player.
Yeah,
but I was astonished how slow he was at the ruck. And people with Dupont, he's got all the skills, but the basic, back to the basics, like with Barry John, what he does better than anybody is he gets his hands in that at the base of the ruck, and he, there's arms everywhere, there's hands everywhere, boots everywhere. He gets that ball and he whips it out in a fraction of a second. Luku just wasn't at the races. So, the backs were on the back foot, and they're not used to being on the back foot. So
but the French pack weren't at the races either.
Yeah, because they weren't contesting the breakdown, and I don't know why. Because Ireland were all over them at the breakdown and committing a lot of penalties they got away with, but because they were the dominant team, they stopped reffing them.
Thing is with Dupont, Bren, and you make a good point. You bang on. What he's able to do because of the potential he has. When the other lot really put the hustle on him, there's always something in the back of their minds thinking, if we're all over this bloke like a bad suit, he gives us the slip, then we're really hurting. Whereas Luku crumbled under the hustle a lot, and Jiffy will know that people like Jerry Guscott had it, didn't they? Where the just the idea of what he might do to you if you give him half a yard just changes you a little bit, just makes you that little bit more cautious. You had the same skills, Jonathan. I remember Roger Spurrell only tackled you 19 times in one game, and he said could have been a 20th, but he might have given me the slip. But you know what I mean. It's all about potential, isn't it?
Yeah, but you could argue that Jalibert has that, and Jalibert disappeared in the game as well.
He did,
He did a bit, yeah.
Yeah, but if you ain't got a scrum half, it tends a pretty difficult place to play.
Yeah, it is.
I think, well, we did allude to it last week. France are obviously wounded, and their pack didn't compete, and they have injured Jalanche, Taufi Fanua, even Mayafu, who hasn't made his debut yet. Those are all gaping holes that are left for the French side. I should also point out that speaking of poor performances, our predictions league for that game and our predictions for the whole tournament, I think all 5 of us backed France to win the Six Nations, 4 of us backing a Grand Slam, which was completely wrong within the space of, let's be honest, 20 minutes as soon as Ireland had a strangle.
I've been wrong more quickly than that.
Well, Chris, I must give a shout out to you because you're the only one out of the 5 of us to get a single point from that game. The rest of us, we were 4 turkeys, us and Jerry Guscott included. So you're top of the predictions league. So well done you. Enjoy it while it lasts.
Yeah, well,
tell it to Chris.
to the rest of you, that's really nothing to be proud of. All right.
Yeah, exactly. And you're ahead by some way, might I add, as well, because you got a bang-on score for England, Italy. But I think one other thing that I just want to throw out there is we haven't spoken too much about the red card. I think it ended up being a yellow and a red as a result, wasn't it?
How thick do you need to be?
I know.
Well, we got a question on the show tonight, and we said, and I get it really. Said Williams, he had 2 red cards really.
Yeah,
because he had 2 yellows which showed the red, and then the second yellow was upgraded to a red.
Okay.
So he had 2 reds. He had 2 yellows and 2 reds. I think that could be a first.
And he was lucky not to get a straight red for the first one.
Yeah, I thought he was going to be cited again. 3 reds.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's I don't understand players now. I think there are some rugby collisions, but when you're set up for a tackle now, you've got to go a bit lower. I mean, that's common sense now.
I also question how that second one was awful and so blatant. And I was watching and straight away I went, oh my God, he's off. And then it took them a good 3 or 4 minutes to come back to it, which I was slightly amazed at as well. Because I was like, if they come back to that, he's off. And for some reason, it wasn't seen. But the thing I wanted to throw out was, regardless of how silly, careless, and maybe even ring rusty, obviously that's Willems's first international in 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, maybe.
And his last.
And yeah. Yeah. Well, there's been no official ban yet, has there? Or no official outcome. Obviously, it'll presumably be 3. But anyway, I don't think, had he not been sent off, France would have come anywhere near to winning that game, regardless. Okay. England, Italy, England, sorry. Now, before we move on to round 2, Brendan, I'll come to you. I was at an event during this game, so I could only check my phone after full time. And I checked and I was dismayed by the score, and having watched it back, it doesn't seem quite as dismal as I thought it may have been. But just give your thoughts on the sort of mixed opinion. Some people...
Yeah, it was a mixed performance for sure. I mean, the cutting edge attacking rugby mostly came from Italy. As we've become, we sort of expect some good attacking rugby from them. England did batten down the hatches when they went behind. And there was like 50 minutes when the blitz defence worked really well. The game plan shortened. It came in a bit, but they got the job done, all the cliches. And then they coughed up another try at the end to make it look slightly closer than it was. So there's certainly stuff to work on. It certainly wasn't sort of Bazball, as we were being led to believe by Jamie George, although I think that is an aspiration. I don't think that was an immediate sort of, it wasn't going to happen overnight. Away win in the Six Nations, that's all you can say. It wasn't really much more than that. I wouldn't get wildly excited by it. I'm a little bit intrigued by this sort of bandwagon for Ethan Roots. I thought he was okay, but he doesn't do what Tom Pearson does for me anyway. And I'd like to see actually quite a big unit at 6 who can do with the line out like Alex Coles. But again, he was decent, a bit like England, and there might be more to come. So we'll find out on Saturday, I guess.
Jiffy, you mentioned and you said it with a glint in your eye, the New England. From, again, watching it back, there wasn't too much to suggest that, although I think 54% of rucks were a ruck speed of under 3 seconds, which by English standards is pretty good.
I think it's going to be... I think England weren't ever going to lose that game. That's the first thing. The blitz defence, they shot up a little bit and exposed themselves. Where they got to get the line speed collectively together. You can't just shoot them. You got to stay back a little bit. And if they do want to do the Faf de Klerk thing and just shoot them very quickly, then they've got to close in behind him, because that's where you angle into both sides of him. So I think it's a work in progress. I thought Freeman played well. Got something about him he has. But yeah, they'll going. The thing about Italy again, because it's a World Cup. They were. I feel they went into that World Cup, right? And they weren't really there. They weren't in it. They had France and New Zealand. They knew they weren't going to get out that group, right? But I think with the Benetton going well and the Italian side is going well, I think they'll be far more competitive this year. Their backs look dangerous. They exposed the wider channels. So I think they'll be a bit better. So England going to Twickenham now. That'll be a pressurous game, and I do hope they sort it about a bit. from the start. That's what they should do. That's what they should do. Make entertain the fans, buzz ball, and then it'll be a great game. So, but I think it'll be interesting to see, if they're going to make any changes, because they haven't had really much consistency in midfield. The back row. So let's see. I can't see many or if any changes. So we'll have to wait and see. But that you've got to go with England's physicality on Saturday, and that for me would be the difference between the two sides.
I think I agree in that Tommy Freeman was probably the biggest success point for England for me.
Yeah.
I know there's been a lot of discourse around Ethan Roots, and Nick, I was actually more impressed by Chandler Cunningham-South in his stint off the bench than I was by Roots. I wanted to know what you made of that that comparison, because obviously
I thought that they both played pretty well. I thought that Cunningham-South came on, that tackle that he made on Murray probably prevented a try. He made a hell of a lot of ground across. You could see his athleticism, and he really skittled him. But look, I mean, Cunningham-South looks like he's very, very promising player. Ethan Roots, I thought was, I sort of looked at him as being a good club player before the game. I thought in the game he couldn't have had a much better debut. The bloke made 60 meters, I'm not a big data man, but he made 60 meters in carries and so on and so forth. He was the only England forward who really, punched the ball up the middle and was effective. So without him, I think that they might actually have struggled. It's interesting, you look at them. I still think it's I'm afraid I still think it's an ordinary pack. Joe Marler is a very, very sound loose head. Jamie George, I think, is sort of beginning to look at the ears a bit in international terms. He needs a big game. Will Stewart, I don't think is test quality. He's played second string to Thomas Dutoy all season at Bath. He made one or two dents in the loose, but I thought Underhill looked like he's a very good player. He's a really nuggety flanker, but he's not on the pace at test level because he hasn't been playing. He's hardly played for Bath. So yeah. all round, I think that they've got a hell of a lot of ground to make up.
What? I got to ask one thing. If they all the standouts were fit, if Marcus Smith is fit, out of the three of them, would be his number one choice, you think? Especially when he wants to play the buzz ball. And if it is Marcus Smith, which I don't know, I'll wait for your answers. But then you've got to play like Kerr, Dombrandt, and Smith to play the buzz ball, haven't you?
Jiffy, I think that this idea of buzz ball it's a figment of somebody else's imagination other than Borthwick. I'm afraid.
Yeah, that is with Steve. It's ball.
I don't see it. I don't see it at all. I think that he doesn't fully trust Marcus Smith. I think his default man is George Ford, without shadow of a doubt. He picked him to start, and where Finn Smith fits in, I don't know. What I do know is that Finn Smith, playing opposite Crowley in the Northampton at Thomond Park for Northampton against Munster, Smith was absolutely outstanding and actually eclipsed Crowley on that occasion.
Well, so the rugby that Northampton side is playing has been in the making since Chris Boyd.
Yeah,
I mean, and that's years. And they made those decisions so they didn't have any big forwards. They're playing an exceptional brand of all court running rugby. Northampton counter-attacking rugby. They're very good off first phase with everything they do, but that's been years in the making. The notion that you're just going to pick 3 or 4 Northampton blokes, chuck them in the England side, and they're suddenly going to run around like they're at Franklin's Gardens is unlikely at best.
Yeah. I think that look, it's a good point. I mean, they're aspiring to something, but or they may be aspiring to something. I don't think it's baseball, and I think that, Borthwick is fundamentally, he's a conservative coach.
Yeah.
He's a fundamentally conservative coach. And the idea that England are going to go out there and rip it up, they're certainly not going to go out and rip it up without a pack in which there are much, much stronger carriers than they've got at the moment.
And his attack coach is Richard Wigglesworth. I mean, it's not like having Pierre Villepreux there, is it?
It's going to be
or Brian Ashton, let's say. I mean, he is not that type of. He's not that type. He wasn't that type of player. I think he got that type of way.
I think you got to watch him. If you watch Ireland's attack and England's attack, they were too deep, England. I think Freeman did a brilliant move. He come inside for that, to create the try. But they're a little bit. I'm not sure they know what their depth, how to hold their depth yet behind and what they're trying to do in the dummy runners. So if you got a good defense in place, whether it's a drift or a blitz, then maybe Wales will hold them outside. That's why I think they'll maybe have a little go at the forwards first. But as Nick said, if the forwards aren't that great, well, maybe it'll be closer than I expect.
Well,
I think it'll be. I think everything that we've seen over the last couple of years indicates that it will be very, very close.
Yeah.
Interestingly, Jiffy, in your prediction, you've got the biggest winning margin for England out of all five of us. So, talk us through that one. I think
what was my prediction?
32-21 to England.
Yeah, there we are. I just feel, like I said, I think we are where we are, and the problem that I have is that I think that the other sides will look at the first half performance and they will then gear up to know what to do with Wales. And then they'll have to play a little bit more expansive. And if that's the case, if they're not going, you got to, as everyone says, a cliche, but you got to earn the right to go wide first, and that's what we might struggle with because even you look at the back row, Wainwright stepped up in the second half, but Tommy Raffel isn't much of a ball carrier really. He's a jackal specialist turnover, and then Alex Mann comes on. He's not a big man as well. So the two second rows, one's very young, and what's his name? Adam Beard isn't carry much. So they'll have to have real good decoy runners, run the arm, maybe hit the, look for contact, hit the deck and have a quick clear rucks and knock it into a real stand-up struggle fight. So, and that's what I think. Going to Twickenham is always tough. It's always tough. And if you look at this, the fixtures are falling. Italy way, maybe didn't, that great, but England are not going to lose in Rome. So then they're going to have a new Welsh side up there. You haven't got a better opportunity. So if they tactically get it right and they, keep taking over, it could be a good day for England. If it's an open, expansive game and we come tactically and we have parity, then on the second half performance, who knows what we're capable of. So, it's an exciting prospect, but I just think realistically, England should win by, 10, 12 points maybe.
And just to follow up on that, we had a question for you again from Pox on Twitter, or X as it's now known. Where will England and Wales respectively look to target this weekend?
Well, hopefully they'll play Bazball and, and then it'll be an open game. But I do feel that they will target the Welsh front five and they'll close and they'll keep it tight and slowly keep the scoreboard ticking over, play a territorial game. And then, hopefully grind the result out. With Wales, again, the second half, a few tip-offs, shorten the line out, get forwards running into midfield, but they have to have the confidence to carry the ball. That's what Wales have to do. They have to move the big English pack around the field and be clever while doing it, not running one up into two English players and getting smashed back, That's only going to make the Twickenham fans give roar and get behind them. And then, it's a long afternoon then.
England won't play fast and loose with George Ford at 10, will they?
The thing is with George, right? I think if they get on the front foot, he's dangerous because he takes the ball to the line. He's a great distributor. If it's slow, well, it's very difficult for him to, create anything. So it all, again, as we all know, it all comes down to the front five. And if England get really on the front foot, then George Ford is a very dangerous player.
The only reason I mentioned that it wasn't any criticism of George, actually. I just think he's still the best game manager.
Yeah, he is.
The best game understander, let's put it that way, if that's an English word, that they have at 10. And he will see the dangers that a particular style of play might lead England into against a Wales side set up in the way it is, and just do something else. I mean, George can think it through in the real time, is what I'm saying.
But they'll target him as well, won't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, but they didn't get to Finn Russell because they didn't have any ball or go forward, so he just sat back. But then hopefully, if they get on the front foot a little bit, they'll try and get at George, and with George North there as well. Maybe he'll be hopefully charging down that channel.
How can
on the
Wales,
subject of sorry, Nick.
How can Wales shore up that front five? Will Dylan Lewis come in at tight head? Do you think will that happen?
Maybe. Maybe I haven't seen how he's been going in Harlequins. So maybe the familiarity of the English game and the English props, they might have a chat to him and say, how do you feel?
Yeah.
So he might come in. But it's I was quite surprised. They didn't do too bad really in the scrum on Saturday. I thought they would struggle, but I thought the props did exceptionally well, and also where they struggled was in the loose, when they were carrying, they couldn't get any, gain line. So line outs, they couldn't. It was a disaster. So scrimmage, I'm sure England will target it, but let's. But I know, as I spoke to Rob Howley, and they looked at Channel 1 balls. They didn't have to use it last week. Now that's a rarity, Channel 1 ball. So hopefully they can, if they have to do it, they can do it on and then go quickly.
Yeah. You could do it with Will Rowlands, couldn't you?
Huh?
You could do it with Will Rowlands, couldn't you?
Yes. I'm not sure if he's back or not. He's been really good for Wales, really good, So that would be a huge benefit if he came back in, huge benefit, because he carries the ball a lot as well. So that would be I forgot about him actually. Yeah, so hopefully if he can come back in, that'll be a huge bonus for Wales.
I mean, he balances out Lewis Chesham for sure. I mean, I'm not saying Chesham's a poor player. I'm a fan of Chesham, but I think Rowlands can perform exactly that role.
Yeah, he can. And he plays. He's really. I don't think he's had a bad game for Wales.
No,
I didn't realise.
On the subject of front five, I thought Itoje was excellent on Saturday. Didn't get many plaudits. Didn't get the man of the match, but I thought he put in a real 80-minute shift. He's been pretty good all season, actually, Itoje. So that would be fairly comforting for England fans to know that he, I think, is pretty much back to his best.
As long as Earls and Itoje don't have an orgasm every time they win a turnover or something.
Yeah, it's an 11 p.m. kickoff.
I'll explain to you what an orgasm is later, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. I've read about it, but I don't think I've ever tripped over one.
Oh, God. Moving swiftly on, I think Will Rowlands is in contention because he was missing. His wife gave birth, didn't she?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
He's still on orgasms.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it wasn't really moving swiftly on, was it? So I think he's joined back up with the Wales squad, so he will be in to take it.
I do agree with you, though, Jonathan. That is the most annoying thing in rugby. That whole hollering and shouting every time you win a scrum ball or what. I mean, crikey, what? It drives me nuts. When they just shut up.
Ben Earl has been asked about. He's assured he's not going to stop doing it. So I think we've got to get used to it. Given that we've got to get used to him in an England shirt because I don't think he's going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah, no.
Right now, moving swiftly onwards. Actually, last question on Wales before we move on to the other games. I don't think Ireland, Italy should spring too many surprises. So we'll probably talk about Scotland, France a bit more. Rob Hill on X for you, Jiffy. Is Warren Gatland the right person to rebuild Wales now? Bearing in mind we now have a crop of players that don't fit his traditional mould.
I said this last week. That Warren Ball is gone. We haven't got Falataus, Jamie Roberts, Shanklin, Jonathan Davies. The young one, Foxy. So and that's why I said this is a test of Warren, a tactical game, because he always had these players and he's They fitted a bill to how he likes to go. So now it's how do they get it wide and how do they create quick ball from maybe not having the biggest forwards. So that is going to be very, very interesting. You can't. We'll have to see how it goes. Maybe at the end of this year they'll decide what they can do. You can't just. Warren's been brilliant for Wales, so you can't just say get him out because the players aren't there. So you got to give him his head a little bit and say, right, what can he do with these players? So one thing he does do, he gives people tremendous self-belief, and at the moment, that's what these young players want. They want to believe that they can go out there and do things. And what Warren's got to do is get to a plan where, right, how can I fit in the style of play that these players, can achieve?
Yeah, I know that he's always hated the sort of the straitjacket of being a Warren Ball coach, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Certainly I always think of him because I remember him when he was at Wasps, and they didn't play Warren Ball. They played a very, very, very different sort of game. Sean Edwards was a big part of it as well. But I think that he's a coach. Obviously he was the Ireland coach when O'Driscoll came into the side, and so on and so forth. So I think he's probably got many more strings to his bow than Warren Ball. I think he's capable of adapting.
I agree. I agree, Nick, because he's played. The way he's played with Wales is because he's got in and he's gone, right, okay, we've got these players, we play this way.
Yeah.
The difference was, remember, is it Matt Williams, the Scottish coach, the Australian? Is it Matt Williams?
Yeah.
He tried to play the way that an expansive game with Scotland, and he didn't have the players to do it.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. I think Warren understands what caliber of player he's got, what style of players he's got, and then he tries to adapt it. And I think this one now with Wales will be his biggest test because we haven't got those big ball carriers.
Yeah. When you've got Jamie Roberts in the centre, you've got and George North hanging around the back line. You've got a template, haven't you?
Well, Cuthbert is 6'6" as well, so they're all giants. I don't think they were Welsh half of them, to be honest. I've never seen big blokes like that in Wales.
Well, look, for that one, I think all five of us have gone with England. Most of us for England by less than a score. So, judging by our predictions last week, Wales will win.
Wales by 20.
So we can look forward to that. Like I say, Ireland, Italy, I don't think there should be too many surprises there. And just for the sake of time, I think let's blow straight onto Scotland, France, which for me is the toughest one to call this weekend, having submitted our predictions for round one, except for Jiffy, who had the luxury of a Monday submission. We all did it before the tournament. 4 out of 5 of us, Jiffy included, have gone France, just Brendan going Scotland. I would probably be tempted to change by now if I could. Jiffy, you've gone France. I'm guessing you simply see them bouncing back with the bit between their teeth.
I can see, I question their application. If they turn up and they want to play and get and win this game, I think they're capable of doing, right. But I do think that Scotland got 2 injuries now, haven't they? They got Richie's injured, and Crosby's injured. Yeah. So it'll be let's see who they bring in.
Richie Gray, isn't it? Jamie Ritchie's fine.
Is it
Richie Gray? Yeah,
Richie Gray. Oh, okay, he's in. So but Scotland, they showed they had a little bit of a soft underbelly on Saturday for me, and they've got to rectify that very, very quickly. They are a side I enjoy watching. I enjoy watching their backs play. They're exciting to play. The forwards can hold their own. I think they just got to knuckle down and get the right decisions at the right time. And I think that it's a huge test for them now. They've won in Wales. They could have a great opportunity. And yeah, it's testimony to where Scotland have come to say that we're thinking, can they beat France? France were still one of the best sides in the world. But I think Scotland have the capabilities of beating and playing the right game. Conditions again could be a huge factor. But I just feel this all comes down to the French application.
It's completely up in the top 4 inches with France, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, Jiffy, you're dead right. It's obvious, even on the strength of 80 minutes, that what happened at the World Cup had a much more deleterious effect on France than it has on Ireland. And that's testament to Farrell, it's testament to the closeness of the group and what have you. But you have the additional thing in France of the pain of losing in a home World Cup when you really weren't meant to lose, and then losing the best player in the world.
Yeah.
And that's a blow upon a bruise. And that's fine, because you can say, well, we're not a one-man team, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, Antoine's a great player, but, we've got other good scrum halves. But then you lose badly the first game without him. And it's very interesting then to know what their mindset is.
Definitely. Sean Edwards got a big job in his hand this week to get them up.
Yeah, if only he could speak the language.
It was a bit poignant as well, wasn't it? Watching Toulouse at the weekend, because he played one more match for Toulouse, didn't he, Dupont, before he signs off for the Sevens, and he played as well as he's ever played.
He played standoff. He played standoff as well.
He played 10, and he was a genius. I mean, you just think, there he is. He needed to be there,
Andy also gave an interview about the game and said how much they struggled, etc. And it's like, if only we could still be watching him.
The pressure on the French is immense going into this game, because their Six Nations is blown apart if they lose at Murrayfield.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't think you'll see them as they won't be as flat as they were in Marseille, but I don't know. There's talk about the conditions being fairly filthy, and that's always a great leveler and so on. But they've got to turn up on Saturday, no question at all.
Do they make a change at scrum half? Because that Le Garrec's a good player.
I think they will. I think it depends on the conditions again. If it's chucking it down, they might stick. But I think if it's dry, I think they'll make a change. And he's sharper. He is sharper, so that'll be interesting. Because I think Charlie Bear is a good player, and he's played really well this year.
Yeah, he's a good player.
And he's got to bring, and Dante. When Dante comes into the game again, it's a different ball game for them.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting because Aldrit is a bloke who tends to, he just plays with an intensity all the time. But on on last Friday night against Ireland, at the end of it, he looked a very dispirited man. I mean, he didn't look as if he had too much left in the tank at all.
There was a bit of conservatism around their selection as well. I mean, not only Waukee, so you've messed up your own line out because they didn't have Flamand either. Yeah. So they don't have a genuine line-out kingpin, but also the change on the left wing. And it told you a hell of a lot of what you needed to know to drop that BRE who is electrifying.
Yeah. I would have said that it took quite a lot to heave old Gabin Villiers out of the side as well.
I mean, to pick a centre on the wing, presumably on the basis of muscle and physicality, was very odd.
Strange to see.
Yeah. Funny.
And Ramos played, Ramos is playing poorly. You look at his kicking out of hand. I mean, all he's not finding grass, virtually never. He's always straight in the breadbasket.
Well, and Jalabert kicked one touch finder behind him, didn't he? When he was going for the 5 metre line, he managed to, last bloke I told you, that was Eric Elwood.
Yeah. I think it's like we all know, it's just mental for them. It's just, let's see what happens on, this year, because they could just, on the back of the World Cup, they go, forget this World Cup, they could just roll over for the whole tournament, which would be sad to see. But the first 20 minutes will be really interesting in Murrayfield.
Yeah.
I just wonder whether the weight of the World Cup loss as well publicly will be weighing on them slightly, because obviously France has had to deal with home disappointment, which I don't think many of them expected to go out in the quarterfinals. I don't think it sits well with many of them now. And now that home loss in Marseille, which, let's be honest, was a humiliation, I think that all of that will be highlighted in the press and, like you say, from the likes of Saint-Andre, etc. So I think they're taking all that with them to Murrayfield, and that's why I might be tempted to change my prediction to Scotland if I could. But I can't. And yeah, just to run over those predictions leagues before we wrap up. So Chris, you're in the lead with 16 points. He shrugs his shoulders as if it's either effortless or he doesn't care. I think it's probably the latter.
And you'd be right.
I'm in second, and then Jiffy, you're on a team with Jerry Guscott and a few others. You're in third, and then Nick, you both got only one correct result, so you're bringing up the rear. Obviously, it's only week one, and actually, funnily enough, Jiffy, the guys you're on the team with, the person who'll find out who wins is Nigel Owens, who is obviously just behind you, and he'll get all the plaudits if he wins.
Of course he will, as usual.
Actually, only one thing before you go, because that Scotland win felt like a defeat, we sort of glossed over the fact that it's very rare indeed to have 3 away wins in the Six Nations in the same round, let alone the opening round. I've got no idea what the stats are on it.
Yeah.
So that's my excuse for predictions being difficult, by the way.
No, that's a very that is a very good point. And just on the Scotland front, they've now won, is it all 4 of their last Six Nations openers?
Having not won for about 15 years before that, I think.
Yeah, they were 4 out of 6 from the past 6 years. Before that, they were 1 out of 17.
Yeah, they had a shocking record.
Yeah. So, well, there's a bit of a turnaround for you. Man,
can't beat statistics, can you?
No. I like that stuff, but you guys don't.
Yeah, well, you should get out more. Just get out more. You're young. You're a student.
I wasn't watching it, but wasn't there down Jiffy's part of the world on Scrum 5 or something? Wasn't there some statistics on the first half against Scotland suggesting that Wales should have been in the lead at half time?
Really? There was an expected, on the game expected score. Sean Holly wasn't his start. It was some computer, and he got absolutely smashed for it. So I told him, "Don't worry about it, mate. Don't worry about it. Ignore it. Thick skin."
Well, for people worried about AI taking over the world, just look at that then, because that logic. Wales would have won by 50 points.
Yeah, exactly. Crazy.
Yeah. I think there was a thing about AI in a football game where it had like a ball tracking setting on for a football match, and one of the linesmen was bald, and the AI tracked the bald guy's head for the entire game instead of the football. I think there are still some issues with it, to say the least. That's probably a more extreme version.
Computer says no.
Yeah. Right. On that note, Jiffy, when are you off to Twickenham? Are you going on the Saturday, or are you heading up the day before?
No, I got a couple of things on in London on this week, so I'll be up a little bit earlier, and then I'm doing rugby special in Manchester on the Sunday. So yeah, another busy weekend. But I'm playing golf tomorrow, so the weather's nice.
Nice. Well, enjoy your round, and I'm sure it'll be a busy week or busy couple of months for you. So enjoy that. Good luck to Wales, but not too much luck on Saturday.
Well, you have a nice day on the golf course, Jonathan. I'll be taking the dog to the vet. But there you go.
There we are. Good. There we are. I thought, is he taking you to the vet?
I was going to say, make sure they don't operate on you.
I mean, my distemper is terrible at the moment.
There we are. Well, listen, boys, thanks for having me on, gents. I hope to catch up with you in the Six Nations.
Good to see you, Arsenal.
Thanks so much.
Take care, boys.
Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Rugby Paper Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use and recommend the show to your friends. The Rugby Paper is available to buy every Sunday, and to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe through our print, digital and online options at therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions. That's therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions to get all our content for as little as 14p per day.